Greetings and thank you for joining us at futuremoneytrends.com. I have a great guest for us today. I interviewed him on the morning of the election or the day before. Was without a doubt one of the best guests we've ever had on. Just an avalanche of information behind every word out of his mouth. I mean, this nobody does more research than this guy. I do have to put a disclaimer. If you're feeling a little blue about the economy, this interview may put you over the edge. Our guest today is Karl Denninger of marketticker.org. He's the author of Leverage: How Cheap Money Will Destroy the World. Karl, thank you for being on the show today.
No, thank you for having me on.
Well, hey, sir, the last time you actually predicted that you thought Trump was going to be able to do it, he did it. The first big, I mean, there's so much to discuss about what's happened just in the first 45 days. We just had the healthcare bill come out last night. I really want to talk about that. But before we do, I think there's something really big that nobody's talking about, and that's the debt ceiling. Obama and Boehner kicked the can for over a year, just over a year ago. And here we are, March 15th, the debt ceiling, whatever the debt's at, that's it. That's going to be the new debt ceiling. So we're essentially maxed out in about 8 days from now. Do you think this is going to be the crisis that the establishment Republicans and Democrats use to really permanently do damage and crush the Trump presidency?
No, in a word. And the reason is this. I don't see any possibility that the House will fail to pass a raise of the debt ceiling. I just don't see it. I mean, I know that there is a group of Republicans that will say, "Oh no, we can't be doing that." Okay, but let's keep a couple of things in mind, and that is that the Republicans are not the only ones who would want to see that happen. Okay, so you've got the entire Democrat caucus who does not want to see Social Security checks fail to go out. And so as a result, this is one of those bills that, it's in the must pass category because, if it doesn't, then the government shuts down. But let's stop with the BS on this, because it would not be hard at all to get a couple of handfuls of Democrats to go the other way. And so, how do you stop this? I mean, when you think about it, remember that you would have to have somebody willing to filibuster on the Senate side to force a 60-vote majority requirement. And since it is not part of reconciliation, and it isn't exempt in one of the other categories, the Senate is the place where it could be stopped. You could get somebody like Rand Paul that conceivably could decide he's going to filibuster and put a halt to it, but it's not going to happen. And I know that the ceilings are going to be hit. Okay, fine. The Treasury's been drawing down its cash balance over the last couple of months. So when Obama went out of office, they had quite a decent little cash balance, but it's not very good now. You also, however, have to remember that there is a very large chunk of cash that typically comes in. This is kind of wonkish, but I watch the Treasury statements pretty closely because they're essentially the check register for the government along with the ledger. Okay, so I mean, if you want to know where the cash position is and where the money's actually going and how much money's coming in and from where, the MTS and the daily Treasury statement are the two documents that tell you that. And April is a month that typically has a positive deficit. In other words, we actually run a surplus in April, and the reason is that people have to pay their taxes. Okay, so you get the balance that's due. Everyone says, but there's all these refunds that go out. Well, remember, what a refund means is that you overpaid, but all the people who are individuals, and then the corporate deadline is, of course, March 15th. So corporations are paying their taxes in March and April, and individuals are, of course, paying theirs in April. And then there's a couple of others that come up. The quarterly estimated come up in June and September. And so there are several months out of the year that almost always are either positive on cash flow or are very close to being positive. And it just happens that March and April are two of the months that typically end up being reasonably decent. So the fact that we have this ceiling coming up here in a few weeks, it doesn't really change much because you're going to have a positive cash inflow into the Treasury in March from all the corporate filings.
Okay, so it looks like it's not going to be another 2010 or summer 2010 or 2011 when we had the big debt crisis, and the S&P downgraded, gold shot up, and for a moment it almost seemed like they were going to try to do something to change the course. Of course, now they've gotten so bad they just did a holiday. Let's move to healthcare. They just put a bill out. This is very fresh. I know no one could have possibly had time to review the whole thing, but Trump promised to repeal Obamacare and then replace it. The Republicans actually, while Obama was in office, did several bills to actually repeal it. What have they put forward? Because I know you have focused on healthcare and brought to light to many people that this is a bigger problem and it's something that really no one in kind of the economic world is talking about, but it's actually a significant problem that could totally tank the U.S.
Well, it's going to destroy the United States and its government, and threatens to destroy all state budgets. It's already destroying pension funds. So, I mean, we all know about Stockton, California, right? They were the famous municipal bankruptcy. But in the last couple of weeks, there have been two fairly significant Teamsters pension funds that have both gone bust and are going to end up in the PBGC. That is the federally run but not federally funded guarantee fund when your private pension blows up. The result of this happening is that the private pensions that were paid by those entities are going to be cut by 2/3. So you're going to go from having a $2,500 a month income from your pension to being about $700 or $800. I don't know how anybody thinks they're going to survive on that, but this is what happens when you combine 9% increases in cost on an annual rate with it, and the assumption was that the percentage of GDP for medical care would be about 3% when these plans were put together. It's currently 19 and rising. And then on top of that, you take a 5% treasury rate, which was the assumption that we'd have in the bond ladder, and you make it 1% because the Fed stomps on the curve. So on the one hand, you grossly ramp up the spending side of the balance sheet. And then at the same time, you destroy the earnings side of the balance sheet. And then you wonder why these funds are out of money. Well, this is very hard to figure out. It's kind of like having a $20,000 credit line on your Visa card, and you make $30,000 but you spend $50,000. Well, how long before you run out of credit line, right? I mean, it's just a math problem. I actually have read the entire bill. Spent yesterday evening reading it and cross-referencing it against existing law, which is what you end up having to do. So you have to have about 5 windows open at once because you have to look at the different areas of the code. It does a handful of things. And everybody that's listening needs to understand exactly what this bill does. First off, it does not repeal Obamacare. Let's just stop with that nonsense. And any congressman or other person that tells you it does, you need to stand up in town halls or wherever you are when you hear that, and you need to loudly yell, liar, okay? Because it does not repeal Obamacare. What it also doesn't repeal the penalty. What it does is move the penalty to the back end. So today, starting with this coming tax year, you would pay a $700, $695, or some percent of income if you do not have health insurance, okay? And that number started small, and it's been ramping up over the last few years. And this coming year is going to be at the full boat. This bill gets rid of that, which is where everyone says, oh, look, it's gone. Well, no, it's not. If you don't have health insurance and then you buy health insurance, for 1 year, you will be forced to pay a 30% penalty rate on top of whatever that insurance costs. Now, for people who have families where the annual premiums reasonably can be expected to be in the $10,000 range before you get any kind of subsidy or help. This means your penalty is not $700; it's $3,000. All right. So for those people who think the penalty went away for choosing not to have insurance, you're wrong. They just bent you over the table and are going to get you on the back end. All right. And you are not going to like it. So what it does do is keep all of the pre-existing requirements and things like this. The other bad side of the change is, and this is where they went after some of the things I've been talking about, but instead of addressing them, they pushed them somewhere else. They essentially ended Medicaid expansion, and then in future years indexed it not to the cost of care, but to the CPI-U, which is all urban, medical cost index. Well, last year, or the last 12 months, that cost index, allegedly, if you believe the Bureau of Lies and Scams that puts it out, it was 3.9% over 12 months. I will remind everybody that Medicare Medicaid spending went up at right around 9% last year, and that between the two, there was almost no statistically significant difference. In other words, there was a 9% increase approximately in each program. So essentially what the Congress is doing is shoving better than half of the cost escalation in Medicaid onto the states. They will not, and this will compound over years. All right. So this sort of an increase on a 10-year basis, you look at this and you say, well, what does it do over 10 years? Because that's really kind of the gold standard, right? Is what happens over 10 years. This is going to put about 63% onto state budget expenditures in this area over 10 years. There is not one state in the union that can absorb that. None.
I'm surprised that they would do such a bill, with Republicans having the majority of the legislature. Why this seems suicidal to the party and to the states.
Well, you got to understand how this works. It works the same way Obamacare worked. Okay, it's the same reason Obamacare was passed, and that is that compound expense growth doesn't appear to hose you immediately. It gets you down the road. All right. So the way this works is we get past the next election. And what they're trying to do with this bill is take a detonation that is obvious on the numbers that's going to happen during Trump's first term and shove it off 3 or 4 years. Now, I don't think they'll get enough to do that, but in exchange for this, what they do is they blow up all the state budgets. So, but again, probably won't happen until 2020-ish, maybe a little further. But anybody that looks at this will be able to see what's going on. And so it's, you look at this, you go, gee, what's the big deal? I mean, you got to remember, we put a 2,000-page bill in with the ACA. All right, we changed essentially everything in terms of how costs are computed, where they get allocated. We did nothing to stop any of the collusion. We did nothing to contract the 19% GDP back towards 3%, which is where it historically was before all these monopolies and all this other garbage started. And there's no intention to do that, because if you do it, then we have the mother and father of all recessions. 15% of GDP comes out of the economy today, and Trump will get blamed for that. Remember, Trump is now running his office of president on the back of the ramp in the stock market. All right, and taking credit for it and saying, oh, look, I'm such a smart guy. I'm the smartest man in the world. Look what I did to your stock portfolio. What happens if you actually go after this? The market crashes immediately, because virtually all of the over-levered health providers who have they didn't pay for these expansions in their grandiose facilities and all these administrators, everything else. This wasn't paid for with cash. It was all paid for taken on debt. They'll all go bankrupt, and all their stock will go zero. All right. And along with it, well, so will everything else related to it. We had the housing market was 10, 11% of the economy, all right, before it blew up back in 2007. that was kind of dramatic, right? What do you do if you take 15% out of the economy? It wouldn't stay out for long. And the reason is that we would become the most competitive place in the world among developed nations to put businesses and to run them. We would be taking approximately $1.05 out of the cost of operating a company. People look at me and their heads spin when I say this. And what you need to understand is it's not just the health insurance cost that comes out of the system if you do this. For example, let's say you're a trucking company. Okay. Every one of your trucks has to have insurance, has to have liability insurance in case your truck driver is an idiot and he runs somebody over and injures or kills him. You can't do anything about the kill part, but you do an awful lot about the injure part. All right. So how much comes out of the operating cost of these companies when you take the cost of medical care and cut it by a factor of 5? In other words, it goes down to 20% of what it is today. The intangible costs that get thrown into businesses in the form of liability insurance and time off work, and everything that goes along with this go through the floor at the same time. So we don't just take, roughly 15% or so, 10, 15% out of the cost of employing somebody. We also take a huge amount of expense off the what would be considered the SG&A line from most American corporations. And it's not going to be a small adjustment, it's going to be a very large one. So this would be an enormously good thing from a standpoint of America's competitive posture in the world. However, the disruption would be very real, very material, and until it was complete, there would be a lot of jobs lost, and there would be a huge decline in GDP. It would be over in 12 to 18 months, but it's going to happen if you do this. There is no way to avoid it. And this is why you will not hear anybody seriously talking about this, either in the business media or in the political sphere, because they know that you don't actually have to arrest people for violating the Sherman Act, although you should. All you got to do is threaten it. All you got to do is say, you folks in the medical business, you all have 30 days to post a price for every single thing you do, whether it be drug, procedure, equipment, whatever, and bill everybody at the same price, no matter who they are and how they pay. And if you don't do it, you're going to jail. Okay? And that's all you got to do, because none of these guys are going to go to prison. Right? They're going to look at this and say, well, you know what, half a loaf is better than no loaf at all. We're going to follow the law because, oh, by the way, the law is 100 years old. And we tried to run this scam in 1979. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and we lost, which means there is case law all the way up to the Supreme Court that says these antitrust laws apply to insurance companies, and in that particular case related to pharmacies and drug firms. But they tried to claim exemptions, and they got shot down.
It's a common sense law too, actually, to even think that, as Americans, of course, nobody has the experience of ever seeing a price on anything, nothing, unless you're getting breast augmentation or laser eye surgery, or going to a local chiropractor. Nobody knows what anything costs. My wife and I, when we had our first child, I remember, because she was a teacher at the time and she had insurance. I remember being at the hospital with the baby, and I turned to her and I said, is this going to cost us anything? Because she had some insurance where for pregnancies there wasn't even a copay. Now, of course, by our third child, Obamacare had kicked in. She had quit her job, and we were now business owners who literally, I remember her crying because she was pregnant, about probably 5-6 months pregnant. Obamacare had kicked in, and she would call, California. They didn't know what to do. Blue Shield didn't know what to do. Anyway, all said and done, we ended up, that pregnancy was just over $5,000. Okay, so this is going to implode, whether it's in Trump's first term or second term. the implosion happens, what then? What is likely to happen to the U.S. economy? And is this, see, that's what's interesting about this, is no one really is talking about this healthcare issue. I hear a lot of things why the economy could crash because of severe deflation or severe inflation, what the Fed's doing, what's going on with the stock market, what's going on with unemployment, many things, but I don't know if there's anybody out there, any other commentator that is well educated and has great research like you that's talking about healthcare. So let's say healthcare implodes, or it will implode. What happens then to the U.S.?
Well, I think, I mean, exactly how this thing detonates and who dies, if you will, from a corporate perspective, from an economic perspective, is very hard to figure out. Because if you think that this beast is just going to roll over and quietly go into the night, you'd be very mistaken about that. That has never happened in the history of the United States. I mean, you look at what occurred in 2007 and 2008. We had two little hedge funds that blew up. And then you had people that detected the problem at that point, which, by the way, had been obvious for a couple of years. Same sort of thing happened in 1998 and 1999 with the internet business when I was involved in it. I knew it was going to crash in 1997, but I didn't know when. And I got out of the business in 98 because it was getting even more ridiculous. And it was another year and a half from the time that I made the decision to go ahead and do that until everything fell apart. So timing is always a problem. But here's the thing that everybody needs to take away from this, and that is that when this goes up in smoke, there are some things that you can very reliably count on happening. And one of them is that if you are dependent upon high dollar treatments or medical interventions that are common today, if you have a high impact disorder or disease, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and the complications that come from those, you're going to die. You need to understand this very clearly. You're going to die unless you have Donald Trump style money, and you don't. Okay, so there are, and by the way, if you think you're doing pretty well, you got a couple $100,000 a year coming in, you got a $750,000 house and a couple of nice cars, and things are pretty stable. You're not bankrupt. Yeah, okay. Go spend a couple of weeks in an ICU due to the complications from this kind of thing, and tell me how much of that $250,000 that you thought you had you still got. Okay, because the answer is going to be zero. And so, the bottom line is that as the system starts to cannibalize itself, what it has done up until now and will continue to do is since they can't take from those who have nothing to take, they will attempt to take everything from those who have something. So the only way to avoid that happening to you is to not need. All right? Because if you do need, then you need to decide whether or not you're going to just make peace with God and leave whatever wealth you have to the people you choose, or whether you're going to essentially donate it to a corrupt system that is stealing about $1.05 today in the economy. All right. I am not going to make any such donation. and there are other options. Some of them are not very legal, but among the legal options, the best one that you can take is to become independent of that to the extent that you are able. And for most people, there are exceptions. I mean, there's unfortunately, there are people who are dependent that can't do anything about it. And there's going to be a lot of death. All right. That's just the way it's going to be. But for most people, and look, if you get up and go in front of the mirror right now and you look in the mirror, if you've got a gut, you're metabolically compromised, you better fix that, and you don't have a whole lot of time to do it. Because those problems are progressive. They don't get everybody. I mean, there are people that are 85 years old and they're fat as hell and they have no noted health problems. Okay, I mean, all their biological markers they're right up the middle. That person is exceedingly rare. Everyone thinks their kid has 140 IQ. The truth is, IQ is a bell curve. There are very few 140s, right? Most people are right up the middle, somewhere between 90 and 110. That's just how it works. And so if you personally are sure that you're not compromised and you're going to stay that way, then go ahead and do what you're doing. But this is probably not true. I penned an article a couple of years ago that said the one path everyone that's 18 or older can take to essentially try to self-assess where you stand on that curve. Okay. And then some things that you can do if you find that you don't like the answer to the question. All right. And the nice thing about doing it yourself is that what I did was I focused on things that you can do as an individual that will never hit your medical file. And this is extremely important if it hasn't hit it yet. And that is this. With what's going on here, when this starts to come apart, the guaranteed issue and things like that are going to go away. We're going to go back to what we had before. If your medical record gets branded, you're screwed. All right. And the way your medical record gets branded is that something terribly adverse ends up in there because you've got a condition that's extremely expensive. Right. So, I mean, you must, if you can't avoid it because it's already happened, well, then, now becoming independent becomes even more important because the idea of being able to buy insurance is basically going to disappear at some point in the future. But if that,
so you're talking about are you talking about getting a blood work from a life insurance company rather than going to the doctor? What are you talking about?
No, I'm talking about two things that you can do to assess your the amount of metabolic damage you've accumulated if you are in any way overweight or obese. And that is through a couple of very basic protocols having to do with blood sugar testing. You can buy the materials to do that at any Walmart, and they're cheap. Okay. And the results are yours because you do it in your house. You don't have to send anything off to anywhere. And so if you find that that's the case, then you need to rethink your relationship with what goes in the pie hole. And you need to do it now. Because if you don't, then, since this damage is progressive, it takes decades in most cases before it shows up clinically and your doctor gets it. All right. And that's at the point at which, he gets it on your routine physical or whatever have you. But it normally takes years or even decades before things degenerate to the point that just a random check. Because remember, when you go in for a physical, unless you're complaining about something, the doctor runs a standard set of stuff, okay, and does a standard set of things that he looks at. And unless he sees something that looks out of the ordinary, he's not going any further because there's no reason for him to. Once you become symptomatic to the point that you show up on a random screen, when you go in for a physical, not only does your chart get branded, but the damage has gotten pretty bad. And there have been warnings that have been available to you if you're paying attention for years, if not decades, before that happens. So you have the ability to know where you are privately. And this is something that part of this has been possible for quite a long time. But the second part of it, which is knowing what your A1C level is, without having it end up in your medical chart, has not been easy until fairly recently. Now, over the last few years, you've been able to get these tests and take them in your own house. And these are things that are sold over the counter. There's no prescription, pay cash, so there's no record of it on a credit card anywhere, too. And the data is yours. All right. You make the assessment. You decide what, if anything, to do about it. And if you want to seek medical advice once you have the knowledge, I think that's not necessarily bad. But I just think that one of the things that is very important here is that as this system degenerates, the branding of people and essentially the sifting of individuals into different buckets is going to become more and more prevalent. And remember, we have big data now all over the place. You have it on Facebook. You have it in all these different companies. Like Salesforce just announced yesterday that they signed a deal with IBM to expand their artificial intelligence offering, is what they're calling it. Let's just cut the crap and call that what it is. It's data mining. Okay. This is the taking of information from multiple sources and correlating it all together and drawing inferences from it. And I've been involved in the technology industry since I came of age. This has been what what everybody in this field has focused on forever. It's not going to go away. It's not going to slow down. If anything, it's going to accelerate. And people need to understand that companies don't do this for your benefit. They do it for their benefit at your expense. So as soon as you start leaking information into places where it can be dug up and filed, number one, it never goes away, ever. Things that I posted on the internet in the 1980s are visible if you know where to go look for them. And that will always be true of everything you do on social media or anywhere else. Secondly, anything that ends up in any kind of official record, you're never going to get rid of, ever.
Karl, let's close out this interview on things that you might be optimistic about.
I think you're going to get another. I think there's a few years that are left for you to have some time to effect these changes. Okay, so I don't think you're going to see like the detonation of the medical system, 12 months from now. The optimistic side of that is that there is time for you to make what adjustments you can. I would be very careful anywhere near public equity or debt markets. And frankly, I think that the impact of this when it comes is likely to be quite deflationary, which is not bad if you happen to want to acquire hard assets. So remember that all dislocations generate opportunity. You have to be patient. Chasing things never works. Not in the long term, unless you have inside information. And in the markets anyway, if you do that, you're supposed to go to jail. We know that certain people don't, but most of the people that are listening to this are probably not in that certain people group. So you're running a terrible risk by trying to use that if you manage to come upon it or get it funneled to you. But what you can do is take advantage of opportunity when it arises. There was opportunity for those people who were prepared to pounce when the housing crash happened. If you were in the right parts of the country, you could buy homes for $50,000 that were selling for $300,000 not a long ago. Okay, those kinds of opportunities will come again. Remember that somebody goes out of business. There's now a building there, machinery and equipment, and none of that stuff disappeared. Okay, the stuff is still there. It's the financing that blew up in their face. So I think you want to be prepared there to take advantage of opportunity. But to do that, you need to be able to be more or less independent of the parts of the economy that are the biggest areas of the scam. So if you were a builder during the housing crash, you got hurt pretty bad. Okay. If you were invested in internet companies, or you were an internet company entrepreneur that was playing pets.com in 1999, when 2000 came, you were bankrupt. All right. When this one goes up in smoke, if you're dependent on the medical system, you're going to be dead. So, or broke, or both, probably both. So don't be. All right. I mean, the biggest key to survival in these sorts of events is don't be where the bomb goes off.
Karl Denninger of marketticker.org. Everybody posts regular blogs. You can also read his book, the author of Leverage, How Cheap Money Will Destroy the World. Definitely want to have you on the show. Hopefully we can get you on the show maybe every other month as this unfolds. Your research, really, I can't compare it to anybody's. It's very in-depth, but at the same point in time, I'm not going to lie, it's a little scary. Makes me uneasy. Karl, again, thank you so much for your time. It's very valuable to us. Appreciate it.
Thank you much. Talk to you soon.